Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in what promises to be an important conversation. So we have a wonderful panel of speakers who will be joining from Freetown, Sierra Leone, from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Washington, D.C. in the U.S. We're also so pleased to have people in our audience from around the world, including Malawi, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and many others. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are recording this event in Canada's capital, Ottawa, Ontario, on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And we also know that we need to move beyond land acknowledgements to actively advance reconciliation and justice in Canada and around the world. So we're honored to be hosting this event as part of the Government of Canada's International Development Week. In respect to this year's theme of Go for the Goals, today's conversation will focus on Sustainable Development Goal number 4, that of quality education. But more specifically, we're discussing what amounts to the most critical indicator of quality education, are children learning? And to drill down further, are children learning to read and write? And are they gaining the ability to do basic mathematics? Literacy and numeracy, the very foundation of learning, and a prerequisite to making progress on SDG 4 as a whole. In fact, the SDGs full stop. Without basic literacy and numeracy, children's learning is, in effect, impoverished, because as gateway skills, they open the door to a lifetime of learning and opportunity, and without them, that door can be just as easily shut. One of the admirable features of SDG 4 is the expansion of the global framework to include secondary school completion in addition to primary school completion for all girls and boys. But if a child can't read and write, the idea of 12 years of schooling simply disappears. To underline just how critical this point is, while also highlighting the fact that the world is in a learning crisis, the World Bank and UNESCO's Institute of Statistics created the concept of learning poverty, as measured by the proportion of children who cannot read a simple text with comprehension by age 10. According to the research, more than half of all children in low and middle income countries are not able to read proficiently by age 10. With this growing to almost 90% in sub-Saharan Africa. For CODE, the Canadian NGO of which I am the executive director, and which has been working to address literacy needs, including the need for qualified teachers and predictable access to relevant reading materials for the last 64 years, these numbers are deeply disturbing. So with that, I welcome today's discussion entitled, It's Time to Tackle Learning Poverty. Now, I know you were all expecting that Natalie O'Neill would be moderating our discussion today. Natalie is a board member at CODE, and before retiring, she was Director of Education and Social Development at Global Affairs Canada. Unfortunately, Natalie has caught a bad cold and has lost her voice. So you're stuck with me, but we do wish her a quick recovery. Okay, so just a few housekeeping items first. During the course of the discussion, we encourage you to enter your questions in the Q&A. You'll most likely find the Q&A button at the bottom of your webinar screen. You also have the option to upvote someone else's question that you like, and or submit a question anonymously. We'll have about 20 minutes for a Q&A at the end, so I hope we'll have the opportunity to answer as many or all of the submitted questions. Please feel free to use the chart to introduce, or the chat to introduce yourself. Tell us your name, who you work with, and where you're joining from today. Our CODE staff will also be sharing the bios of our speakers, as well as some links to other resources on topics that you may find helpful. And lastly, this event is being recorded and will be posted on CODE's website and YouTube channel soon after. So our speakers today. They have impressive and extensive bios, but for the sake of time, I'll keep the introductions brief, and you can find a more fulsome bio of each in the chat window. So we're delighted to have with us Dr. Daniel Baheta, Chief of Education at UNICEF Tanzania, having previously worked with UNICEF in Kenya and South Sudan. Before joining UNICEF, Dr. Baheta served with the Canadian International Development Agency, which is now the Global Affairs Canada. We also have Sybil Bailor, country lead for Code Sierra Leone, who oversees programs that very much focus on foundational learning. Sybil has over 20 years of international development experience in West Africa and in the UK. And Marcela Gutierrez, an education specialist at the World Bank. She has 10 years of experience designing and implementing human development programs and large-scale research projects in Africa and elsewhere around the world. Welcome all, let's get started. Let us start by setting the stage for this conversation and looking a bit more deeply at learning poverty. Marcel, I'll direct this to you. Why do you feel it was important to coin this concept of learning poverty? And despite its complexity, to establish that one single simple indicator to measure it?
Thank you for the question. I think at the bank we've noticed that there are many indicators for education. We have the SDGs, we have attendance, we have many indicators, but there was a lack of focus. Given that there were so many, I think, education specialists and all knew about the 80 plus SDG indicators, but we really wanted to raise the alarm on the situation on education, and we were feeling that people noticed that it was not at the right stage, but they didn't notice how bad the situation was. So to raise the alarm and the urgency of the crisis, we started thinking about this very basic indicator that people could understand, relate to, and even test in their own environment. So we also, we decided to focus on literacy because we, as you mentioned earlier, understand the importance of it as a building block and know that if a system is failing to teach their children how to read, it's very likely that it's failing to teach their children almost anything else. So it was an indicator that was correlated with many of the other things that matter in the system and that people could understand. Interestingly, after we launched it, we've done some studies, and CGD, the Center for Global Development here in Washington, did a study and contacted policymakers about the share of learning poverty. Everyone said they had a problem, but in average, they underestimated the number of children could not read in their own countries by half. So there's no surprise that if people are underestimating so much the amount of children that cannot read and understand the simple text, they're not paying as much attention or devoting as much resources to the foundations of learning as they should. So with this indicator, we were trying to raise the alarm and show the world that right now 70% of children 10-year-old in low and middle income countries cannot read and understand a simple text. And I think that number is something that if it doesn't shock you, it should. So we were trying to generate this and generate this shared understanding of the catastrophe we were facing so that the society and politicians and everyone from the cab driver to the president could understand and align behind this need to tackle foundational skills.
Well, it really is an incredible number, whether we look at the low end or the high end of it. So I like that term and like that notion of raising the alarm, because if you're not alarmed, you should be, as you say. Daniel, let me ask you, it's learning poverty is described as a global crisis. Do you feel it is truly a global in nature?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, Paul, for organizing this event, and of course, I thank each and every one of you paying attention to this globally. We're all one family. I should not depress you by telling you where I am. I'm in Dar es Salaam. I am from Ottawa. I should not discuss about weather, even though as a Canadian, I'm tempted to start with that. And I should not tell you it's 28 degrees and it's a beautiful day here. I will not say anything of like that, so I don't depress you more. I really think it's a global crisis because, you know, each and every one of us, whether you are in Ottawa, you are in Toronto, you are in Singapore, everyone and every generation complains about education, because I think it's in our nature to get better as human beings. So as we strive to do better, as we strive to protect the climate, as we strive to to really pay attention to human rights, to protect the right of indigenous people across the board, as we strive to respond to COVID, as we strive to do all kind of really complex and complicated things in the 21st century, our education system, not one, it's not prepared, and two, it has really not changed much in order to prepare everyone that is willing to really adapt and change. So I think the crisis, I see it in my own children who are going to an incredibly expensive private school because of the privilege that they have, because of what I do. I see it in people that I work with and I work for across the world in this continent, including myself, coming from a very public school in Ethiopia, from where we started. As I look back, I think our education system is in crisis. And there are multiple reasons why that's the case. I think because, our economics is a big factor, because we are really focusing on technology, on information-based and biotechnology. The population growth, there are lots of factors impacting that. So our learning, our children today, particularly in this continent, are really suffering because we have no access to quality learning that is relevant, that teaches competency, that deals with social issues, with political issues of the 21st century. We're not prepared. And this is really at the heart of the problem. When I look at this region, we have 209 million children who are in the pre-primary and secondary, just ISAR, 21 countries in this region, we have 209 million children that are currently at school. If I really want to depress you, I will ask you to do some maths. In the next 30 years, that number will be doubled. So currently, let's take Tanzania because I'm here. We have 16,000 schools. Today, we have 16,000 schools, and we have about 16 million children in the classroom, in the school, primary, secondary, and post-secondary. If we were to double this, we would require to build 16,000 more schools. Our current investment in education is less than 20% of the GDP. We have 300,000 shortage of teachers. We don't have enough water and sanitation for our girls to come to school. We don't have early learning. We don't have the right curriculum, the right competency. We are reforming policy, we're trying to change, but the level of problem we're about to face, and with the issues we have, it's really not competing. And of course, we'll talk about technology and the impact of technology that will bring. I think it can bring us some solution, but with everything that we can put in place today, if we were to do firefighting, it is really, really difficult to plan. I keep saying to people when they ask me, it is the hardest thing to become the Minister of Education in any part of the world, particularly in Africa. Because if you are a Minister of Education in Africa today, every single person is complaining about you because the kids are not learning, the teachers are not getting paid, there is no infrastructure, government. So there is a real complexity. So the issues are compounded, it's everywhere. I know if I ask any of the parents in this panel who are sending their children to Ottawa Public School, which is where I did my secondary education, they will tell you the way we were learned is not what our children are learning. The quality of learning in Ottawa Public School is not the same as we had. Yes, of course, our values have changed, our system, children are learning something different that's relevant to them, but the old style of teaching and the current need are not matching. And I think that's where the issues begin. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, a lot to think about there, but definitely confirming the notion that this is truly global in nature. Each country will have its own particular challenges. Some will be more challenged than others, but this is not an issue that any country or community is immune to. So, but that speaks as well. It's a good introduction to the next question, which is we're talking about learning poverty, we're talking about foundational learning, and the terminology might be somewhat new, but the experience of children not learning in the classroom, not gaining the foundational skills that they need to continue their education, it's certainly not a new one. And we've, we can look at it, we can say, hey, billions have been invested. What about the 30 years or education for all, the Millennium Development Goals, the problem persists. Why is it such a hard nut to crack? Sybil, if I could start with you and maybe to ask you to share some of the day-to-day realities facing students and teachers in Sierra Leone, where you work.
Thank you, Scott, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me on. I think I appreciate the way how Daniel has just put everything together, and he's begun to touch on some of the things we are not, we are not alien to some of those things that he's explained there. For us here, really, I've just summed them up in like three rough areas: the teaching environment, the quality of teaching, and the unavailability of learning material. There's some piece of work that was done by the World Bank that speaks to a few of these areas, which thankfully, as code an organization working here in Sierra Leone, we're beginning to tackle. Firstly is the number of unqualified teachers within our country. It will interest you to know that the passing score to earn a teaching certificate here in Sierra Leone is 25%. So you only need to have 1/4 of the content of the knowledge on which you're tested to graduate as a teacher. Now that's stark. Secondly, we have about 36% of teachers who are not qualified at all. So in our classrooms, we have teachers who are not qualified to train as teachers. Thirdly, we begin to look at things like inefficient teacher allocation ratios to children, ghost teacher, absenteeism, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the kind of things that are beginning to affect our work, here in Sierra Leone when we look at the, what happens to teachers and students on a day-to-day basis. But based on also Code's work, I'll give you some sort of quick rundown on what we found as well in terms of the work that we're doing. At primaries 1 to 2, between the ages of 6 and 9, we have 40%, in our own intervention areas, there are 40% of the teachers are undertrained. We cannot talk enough about the limited resources within the classrooms. Thankfully, accompanying the work that we do here is the book development and book distribution, and that goes along to complement that. I've spoken about this before, and there's also an issue around entrenched and embedded long-lasting ideas of traditional teaching and learning, which needs to be addressed. The classroom I was being taught in some 40 years ago is still the same place I walk into 40 years later on. That has to change because the society, the world, everything is changing around us, and we need to be able to respond to that. So those are the kind of things that, I think, we face on a day-to-day basis here, in Sierra Leone. So let me stop there for now.
Thank you, Sybil. So what I'm hearing, in particular, a big emphasis on the qualifications of teachers is a key element. And Daniel, let me put the same question to you in terms of the day-to-day challenges that teachers and students are facing in Tanzania or anywhere else that you have experience in.
Interestingly, teachers work really, really hard in this part of the world, despite the complexity of. So I'm wearing my UNICEF clothes today because I was in the field, and I'm branded, and it was not to impress you, but I was in the ground today. We went to a classroom in some remote area, and one teacher was teaching around 93 kids in early childhood class in Baheta. Just flew this afternoon from that part of the world. You begin to understand and saying, how is it possible? If these children are going to compete in a global market, is it really reasonable for us to request of them to be part of this global service? And Baheta, extremely green, very rich, agriculturally very wealthy place, but yet the classroom size is big. The teacher cannot manage. It's an early learning. So as my colleague from the World Bank was saying, how is it possible that these kids are able to read and write? That environment is not conducive. So the school environment is not conducive. My Ethiopian brothers and sisters who are on this call can tell you, we are all as Ethiopians incredibly shocked because there was a national exam at the grade 12 level just a few days ago, and the results came out, and I was in Addis on a mission with my colleagues. 3% only passed that exam. Out of 1 million kids that sat for grade 12 exam, only 3% were able to pass that exam. How is that possible? Is it because the kids are not able to learn? I don't think so, because I went to that public school and I've been able to be successful. I was taught in those classrooms. And therefore, there is something completely not right with the way we are teaching, what we are teaching, the content of what we're teaching. There is something completely wrong the way we're planning for education. We're not investing enough. Teachers are not trained. The people who are becoming teachers are not motivated. Like I can tell you, in any of the country in the continent, if you're going to become a math teacher today, it's because you have failed to become a medical doctor or engineer on sciences. If it's not because you are really passionate about teaching math, you become a math teacher. You become a math teacher because you have C. In Kenya, Scott, you and I know, in Kenya, to become a teacher in math and sciences, it's because you have not passed the exam, and so you scored C, or then okay, then you become a teacher. Those are the people who are teaching the next generation, and this is really complex. So I would say around 3 issues are really where the problem is. One, the education we're giving our children is not relevant to them, to the community there. It's not connected to what they need to know to live. We're not teaching kids so they can work. We're not teaching that it's relevant to their community, to where they are. We're teaching them because, you were talking about MDG. We brought everybody so they can read and write, but we need to make it more relevant. Number 2, we don't have enough teachers. The teachers we have are not well trained. They're not well paid. They're not well prepared to be able to deal with the crisis we have. Second, we don't have enough investment. Governments are struggling because they have, like I said, 60 million kids, every child in Tanzania. The capitation grant is probably $4 or $5 per child. Now you do the math. What did the child gets from the Canadian government in Ontario versus in Quebec? For a child, what's spent, and we are talking about $3 per year per child. And it makes it completely difficult to use that resources. So we have a lack of resources. And finally, I think we are also behind because we need technology. We need to use technology. We need to adapt to modern way of life. We need to really catch up. We need to get industries going. So if we're going to compete in the 21st century, we need all these things. We don't have the basics. So we are trying to run and to tie our shoes at the same time. And it's really a difficult task to do. We're asked to run really fast, and we're also asked to tie our shoes at the same time. And this is really an impossible task. And so I'll just stop there, and maybe I'll let my colleagues also add more.
Yeah, it's just problems compounding on top of problems. Marcela, let me give you a chance to add to that. Why is it such a persistent problem?
So I like what Daniel mentioned of running and tying the shoes at the same time, because I think that's very accurate. I think we have to, right now we're talking about everything that is not working, but many things have worked. So I think in our regions, and especially in high growth population regions, access to education has increased dramatically. We have never seen systems responding to so many kids. Like before, education was a luxury for a very small cohort of the rich or the privileged, and now most kids are in the classroom. The problem is that learning is not, classrooms are not delivering learning. So actually something that I don't want to depress this audience more, but something that I hadn't mentioned is that before the pandemic, from 2015 to 2019, we were actually not improving. Learning poverty had increased slightly from 53 to 57%. So systems were allowing many, many more kids in, But then we had to respond by hiring teachers that were not necessarily qualified and by decreasing the cost per kid, because the finances, as Daniel mentioned, you have to divide what you have and each kid gets a lower amount. So I think we have the challenge of trying to do many things at the same time. And honestly, we have also not prioritized. We have curriculums that teach civics, environmental science, and a lot of very complex things that are, I'm not saying they're not important, but these kids cannot even read. So we are trying to, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves and not realizing and not wanting to realize that these kids are lacking the basics. I think Sybil and Daniel has mentioned a lot of the critical ingredients of the critical things that are failing. I think at the system level, we have policies that are not directed to learning. We have policies that are very complicated and convoluted. In Africa, we have the most complicated curriculums ever. When you compare African curriculums with Asian curriculums, they have way more subjects. So of course, every kid gets less amount of time for reading, and learning how to read takes time. So we're not aligning things to the scope and sequence, and we're not aligning things to the level of the kids. So I mean, Sybil, Daniel, you've been in classrooms. These teachers are trying to abide by the curriculum. Kids are running behind by 2 years, and the teachers keep going because they have this pressure of a really, really dense curriculum. So the kids are just not learning, and they keep on, and they have 1 or 2 kids in the class that then pass into university, and the rest are behind because we're designing a system for that's not aligned to the classroom realities. So I think if I would summarize, I think we have a couple of things. The technical design of our interventions is not right. We have education systems that don't dedicate enough time to the basics, and we have education systems that don't give the basic teaching learning materials. Kids don't have books, basic books, and it's impossible to learn how to read without having anything to read. We have societies that also have scarcity of print. And then we also have teachers that are pressed to do incredible job without materials and without guidance. So I think at the system level, we have a problem. At the financial resources level, we have a problem, as Daniel mentioned. There is no magic. Right now, low-income countries spend an average of $200 per child. Actually, some say 50. I am scared of that number, so I go with the upper end estimation of 200. While high-income countries OECD countries spend $7,000 per kid. So we're talking about 200 versus 7,000. It's impossible to deliver the same education quality with that. And I go back to my first point. I think we don't have enough political commitment for education. Everyone says it's important, but then we still see teachers that are hired because they're friends of someone, because we still see teachers that are going through the meritocracy without any meritocracy. So I think there's a lot of elements that are just compounding.
So some real common themes coming out from the three of you as you reinforce some of these points. One of the things I find interesting is none of you are trying to say that this is a result of COVID or school closures, that perhaps that exacerbated the problem, but that these are deep-rooted, long existing issues that, as you were saying, Marcela, that between 2015 and 19, in fact, it was already worsening at that point, long before COVID. So then, I mean, we're going to get into these. The idea now is to get into these questions and these common themes a little bit more in depth. So with the learning poverty notion and the indicator, the World Bank has set the goal to cut in half the number of children experiencing learning poverty by 2030. So we want 50% more children being able to become proficient readers by 2030. So, I mean, with such deep-rooted issues and deep-rooted problems, what do you see as the greatest drivers that we need to see happen to accelerate progress toward that goal of more children becoming better readers? You know, what would you say are areas that require the most immediate action and investment? Sybil, I'll just jump around here, but let me throw that at you, Sybil.
Okay, I think firstly we need to continue the work that we're doing in terms of improving the capacity of in-service teachers. The cascade training, certainly I'm speaking, from the code's perspective, the cascade teaching that we're doing, I think that needs to continue. I think it needs to go alongside the book development and distribution process. That is actually absolutely critical. Children need books in their hands for them to learn to read. We cannot do reading without the materials in the classrooms and in the children's hands. I think the education also of the teacher educationals also have to continue. As Marcela spoke, I was just thinking back, I come from a long line of teachers. My grandmother was a teacher, and so was my mother's 3 sisters, all teachers earning a living as professional teachers. And so my partner too, both his parents were teachers and head teachers in schools here in Sierra Leone. So teaching needs to be seen as a worthwhile profession again. And that is how we need, there's no good in throwing the worst of or the least qualified people into the bag or people without a passion to teach children. There's no use putting them together. It will just not happen. It needs to be a holistic approach to it. I also think there needs to be more women at lower levels within schools. I was talking to a staff earlier today, and I also said to her, I never saw a male teacher until I got to secondary school. All my teachers at primary school were women, were part of the nurturing process. I believe it's a big plus, something that we need to look into. Again, the curriculum, or we've heard about the curriculum, I think it's time we need to move away from what we have. We need to radically look at changing that, and also look at e-learning strategies in school. One of the things we're testing out, Scott, as you're aware, is the Rachel's promoting, they're called remote area community hotspots for education and learning, where we download educational materials for teachers and students to access. We need to be able to open up that access to reading and learning material through e-learning strategies. I also think that also for organizations like ours who are working in interventions within these spaces, we also should need to be able to listen and learn in order to improve what we're trying to do. And I think finally, I cannot stress enough that we need to continue to invest in research in education. We have to understand the fundamentals of some of these questions we're asking ourselves. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, I would love to hear more too as we go along about investing in research and where we might aim that. But let me just ask Sybil, just to follow up on one question. I found it interesting, not only that you've got this tradition and background of teachers in the family, of women teachers, but you're also saying we have a shortage of women teachers in Sierra Leone. So what happened? What changed?
I'm not sure what's happened over time, but it felt like, maybe somebody else can answer. Maybe there could be somebody from our audience who can respond to that. But I think gradually over time, women have just found their way out of the sector, and we have more males coming in, especially where it comes to things like the maths teaching. Very early on, you find male teachers in classrooms. I said, I never experienced a male teacher until I got past primary school. All I had was female teachers, aunties, and people who nurtured me, as well as educated me as part of the process. So I went to school without being fearful of anything. I went to school, which there were second nurturers, of myself. So it's a different space, but maybe someone from the audience can respond to that.
Okay, well then I'll jump in because we are following the Q&As here. But let me Marcela, what do you see as the key drivers that we need to focus on to accelerate progress towards specifically the goal of more children becoming better, more proficient readers? And I'm not to put you on the spot, but you made a very interesting comment about potentially or reality of lack of political commitment. Is the alarm bell, do you think that will be enough to help change and drive that need for greater political commitment? But let me open the question to you more as generally as you want.
Let me start with the beginning of your question. I think immediately, like yesterday, we should have gotten a very basic package for each school, for each children. I think basically we know how to get every kid reading. It's not rocket science, it's proven, and kids in every country are smart enough to learn to read. So this is not a problem of them, it's a problem of the system. And we have the evidence to make it work. I think we need to focus. And this is not politically palatable. No one likes to hear that you're setting the system, that you're focusing on basic foundational skills. Everyone wants their kids to be astronauts, and we do too. But I think, as Daniel mentioned, we're tying the shoes as we run, and no one likes to focus on foundational skills. It's not appealing politically. I think what every kid needs, what the science of learning shows that every kid needs, is that every kid and every school needs enough time for reading. We need to revise the curriculum, not even the curriculum, the tables, the timetables at each school, and ensure that kids have the minimum hours required for practicing reading and for learning reading. This doesn't mean that we have to dumb down the curriculum. Many people misinterpret it. No, you can teach many things of the other subjects by practicing reading, but we need to make sure that they have enough time for that and the teachers can allocate that time. Second, every kid needs a book. Like, it's impossible, like it's unbelievable that we still have many schools where kids don't have any books or are sharing a book amongst five. So they're kind of trying to learn how to read by looking at the book backwards. It's really hard. So every kid needs one book and at least one workbook to practice writing. And ideally, there needs to be in a language that they understand. That's basic. And then third, teacher guides that are aligned with the evidence and science of learning and that are aligned with books. Someone on the chat mentioned the teacher guides don't match the books, so teachers are struggling, and we're asking teachers to do a lot. So we need to help teachers with teacher guides that have the basics. If teachers want to modify those guides, be creative, they can, but at least have a basic that is aligned with the science. And they also need continuous practical focused training. Someone in the chat also mentioned one-off training doesn't work, and we know it. What works is continuous training that is very practical, very tailored to the realities of the classroom. We need training that takes into account that classes are not 25 in size, but actually 90 students, so that help the student deal with the realities on the ground. So I think immediately there's a very clear package that needs to be delivered to every school, and that is not super expensive. Like, if we do it right, we should be able to cover this. But if we want to cover this and everything else, and like also do spend money on all of these other add-ons, we won't make it. Like, there's just not enough money right now. So I do think there's a need to focus and a need to recognize that this is the stepping stone of many other developments, and that if we want to deliver to our children what they deserve, we need to start there. In the medium term, I agree with Sybil. Improving the teacher careers, improving pre-service institution, making the teaching career recognized again, meritocratic, something that people like you. I always ask kids what they want to do when they grow up. Rarely they say teachers nowadays. Everyone wants to be a doctor, a lawyer, a soccer player. No one wants to be a teacher. We need to change that. Kids have to start dreaming of being teachers. It increasing salary, increasing the reputation, the recognition. Like, that's something we have to actually work on as an education sector. Improving the career of head teachers. We've all been to fantastic schools where the head teacher makes the whole difference, but we need to recognize and nurture those head teachers. We cannot expect everyone to just be a star without helping them out. So I think in the medium term, we have to do all that, use data for decision making. I just want to make a plug here that in Sierra Leone, actually, the government recognizes the need to get more women into the profession, and are using the data so that if when hiring teachers, they hire qualified teachers, but if there's a tie in qualification, they always go for the females. So I think there's small things that are being done there, but we need schools to be safe for female teachers. We need society to push for that and recognize that girls also can do this job. And so I think there's a lot that needs to be done. And in politics, I don't think we're there yet. I think we as voters have to push our governments to focus on foundational skills. We have to push our governments to put the money where their mouth is. If they say they want foundational skills, if they say they want education, then show me the budget. Ensure that teachers actually get the materials. And I don't see that yet. I actually don't think many governments are doing that. There's some efforts right now in Sierra Leone. Sybil probably knows there was this foundational learning summit that brought together African leaders, and the president himself was talking about the importance of ensuring the foundational. So there's progress, but we're not there yet.
No, great points, and you know what I'm hearing is focus, focus, focus. But I also like that. I think it's so important. One of your early points, you know, how children learn. It's not some huge mystery. We know a lot about what is needed and how children learn and how we can improve. So that's not the problem. I think the question is, are we going to take the action that's needed? Daniel, let me throw it to you. If you were in charge of the world, or at least one corner of it, what would you, where would you put your money? What do you think are the most important drivers for the most accelerated progress, you know, that's reasonable to expect?
Well, first of all, let me attempt to answer Sybil's question. Why are women getting out of the learning, the teaching space? I think they just got smarter. I mean, you know, I think women are much smarter than the rest of us. I think they know where the money is, and they said, you know, the hell with you. You're giving me 100 kids, and I'm only here. And if I go to market and say tomato, I'll make better money, and I don't have this headache. You know, so I think women got smarter. I think that's probably, and they have much more economic responsibility. And the current African market, actually, to be even more serious about this note, is it's an informal one. And so education is not really providing good employment. I mean, if you have a grade 12 education, and if you are in the informal market, bringing goods from China or, you know, secondhand goods, and you're selling that, you make a better resources than becoming a teacher and expect $150 per month with the long hours, and it's not necessarily a rewarding space to be in. So I think at least, you know, as an anthropologist, I can probably make a little bit of theory. But Scott, to answer your question, the answer is I don't really know. To be honest with you, it's a very difficult question to answer. Here are what I think we need to do. First of all, we need to really understand the values of our community. I think we really you know, to use this word, but it was inherited from the colonial, then, you know, post-colonial modern strategy has not served the continent, at least the sub-Saharan continent. So it is really not responding to the needs of the community. So we need to make education relevant to the community. We need to marry our culture, our value, our tradition, our need in the farms, our needs to make industry relevant, to make our education relevant to everyday life. And it's not happening that way. Children are not learning about farming. Children are not learning about, you know, industry that, you know, I mean, we have avocados in every part of this country. You know who needs avocado? Is the Canadian buyer. So how can we not teach these kids to package avocado, to preserve avocado, to dry avocado and send it? We have lots of pineapples. We have lots of mangoes here. We have lots of vegetables. How can we have this trade with the Western society? We have the labor, we have the skill. Why are we not teaching children, young people, to become owners of their resources so they can actually put in the market? Why are we not teaching them about that? We're teaching them about things that is not relevant to them. So we need to make education relevant. We need to make education relevant to the 21st century need of the continent. We need to teach them how to fish. We're in the ocean here. A lot of young people are walking by the ocean. We're not using the ocean. We're not using the resources. We're not teaching about climate change. We're not, you know, we're using lots of plastic, but we're not teaching them about recycling plastic. We're not teaching them about recycling things. So I think we need to make education relevant to what is needed today. Second, I think, of course we need to give books, but every household has a cell phone. We need to use this technology. We need to use this technology to teach parents how to read and write through these things. We need to send text messages, use the current available simple phones to use them as a tool to teach. Because what we need is, as it has been already said, is to give the basic. We need to go to basic. Third, we need to make this as a crisis. And here is what I think is really, really, really important. Today, for the next 8 to 10 years, we need to support teachers with a structured pedagogy that says, this month, this week, this is what you need to teach. This is what is expected of you. By the end of this month, the children need to read this chapter, this number of words. We really need to help teachers with giving them a structured pedagogy without killing their creativity. We need to really give them that support for now, as we build and as we engage. Of course, it has been said a number of times, our investment in education needs to be improved. We need to invest more on teachers, more in infrastructure, more on the children themselves. Without investment, we will not get there. Now, we cannot blame the government or the ministers, or it's not just them. I think we all need to be, the private sector needs to play a role. Parents need to play a role. Parenting is so critical. And, I'm sorry, I'm going to be very critical of ourselves. We as development, we have lots of really funky words. We say we need to develop a parenting strategy. Listen, my mother did not need a parenting strategy, but she raised a son like myself. Scott's parents did not need parenting strategy. This is really, we need to stay away from this ideas and theories. We need to be practical. We need to support parents. We need to ask parents. We need to engage parents. But this parenting strategy it's important to have the key. We need to reach the community, but we really need to listen to what is that they need. What is a parent looking for? And I will end with this anecdotal example. We were in some part of Kenya with the Somali community. This man had about 200 camels. He gave the first son to school. He went to grade 12 and he was chewing mira, and he did not come with any degree or diploma. So he spent all his time. The second son he kept. The second son he came at home, he did not let him go to school. This second son had another 300 camels of his own. So which education is relevant to him? He said, look, I gave you the son, grade 12 education is not giving me money. I kept the son, I educated him, he's raising the camels, and he has 300 camels. One camel is at least $600, $700. So one is wealthy, no education. One has lots of education, but no wealth. So we really need to think about education and the relevance of what we're teaching. Imagine if taught the guy who went to grade 12 education about camel raising, about marketing, then he would have had probably 600 camels. But so we need to make education relevant to that context, to that specific issue. Then I think parents will get excited. Over.
So that's a theme that's coming out from all of you is the importance of relevance. Get kids into school. We have to have teachers, materials, but if the curriculum itself is simply not relevant to their world, to their life, to their future, then what's the point in many ways? We've talked a lot about teachers, and that's one that you've really strongly emphasized, the need for qualified and professional teachers. I want to open up to the group, to the audience, but there's one more point I want to ask to the group. This indicator, the definition of learning poverty, is that children be able to read a simple text with comprehension. So that suggests and demands that they have access to text. On this basic question, what is the best way to get text in front of children's eyes? We do believe and we know that the digital world is going to help us leapfrog ahead, but we also know that in many of the communities where we're active, that the access to devices, to power, to internet, It's still not there. How do we balance that, knowing that the digital world is gonna help us in many ways? But I guess my question is, how accessible are digital materials right now? And do we still need to focus on traditional print for the moment? Marcela, let me put that to you.
So I think there's a role and a critical role for technology in solving the learning crisis. I'm not sure that I'm a believer on it being kids reading text through tablets, because I think many don't have access to these devices, but I do think there's a super important role. Let me give you an example of books. We mentioned it's important for every kid to have a book in front of them. Technology can help do that can have a break it or make it change on that. We have open source libraries with print ready books that can reduce the price of each book to less than $1 per child. We have track and trace systems that can help improve the book supply chain and help us ensure that the books that are actually bought are reaching the classroom with just the QR code that people can take a picture of. We have teacher training that can be done through technology. And let me just stop here to say, we often think of technology as tablets and so on. Radio is a technology that has worked really well in Sierra Leone. Why am I a little bit more hesitant of others? To be honest, we've tried it. In Sierra Leone, we tried a radio program that was complemented by phone calls. And what we saw is that in theory, everyone has phones, but in practice, the phones are being charged on the market. The parents use their phones for work. It's not for kids to use them. They don't have the availability. And we did find evidence in that case that girls got less access than boys to the parents' phones. So I think, if you look at Sierra Leone's map, for instance, you do have an enormous variation on access to coverage and network and so on. So I do think we have to make sure that we use technology smartly to close the gaps, not to widen them, and to solve many of the problems that we have in terms of the book production chain, in terms of the cost of inputs, in terms of teacher training. In Sierra Leone, we're working with the government to actually implement a continuous professional development program that is based on tablets and on classroom observation using tablets that generates a feedback. So there are a lot of things that we can do with technology. I'm not sure that I would go for kids reading in the tablets, just because, as I mentioned earlier, we don't even have enough funds to get the basic package to each school. So getting a tablet per kid seems a little bit of a dream. Not that I don't think they deserve it, and not that I don't think it's a dream worth having, but I think we're in a crisis, so it's time to be practical and use the tools at our disposal in a very effective ways. Teachers love WhatsApp. In Sierra Leone, they had the radio program for training, and they had manuals, and then they met and had coaching through WhatsApp. That worked fantastic. Sybil, you have the program of coaching, and you've also integrated technology there. Radio for reading out loud, like all of those things work wonders. We just have to be creative in how we use it and really adapt it to the context. As Daniel mentions, I think context matters, and there's no one size fits all. And this applies to technology. If we try to import the technology without looking at the realities of the ground, it can be the great unequalizer, and that is something we cannot afford.
Sierra Leone's getting a lot of much deserved attention, I think. But Daniel, let me ask you if you've got an opinion that differs at all. We'll just take a couple of minutes because we want to open up to other questions too.
In defense of the eastern part of the continent, I listen. Look, I think that there are two things we need to be clear. I'm, my Canadian in me is looking at the climate change aspect as well. We cannot cut more books, more trees to build. So we need to move to technology. But here's the deal I will make with you. I think we need to make sure, and I am very, very, very certain about this. This continent in the next 5 to 10 years will be able to create its own tablets. It will be cheaper. It will be made in Africa. Rwanda is leading the way. Ethiopia is very, very closely following. We will create our own technology to be able to use, because we are ready. We are ready. We have the knowledge. We have the resources. We are just having our own internal fight here and there in the continent. But I think we'll fix it. I think we will create the technology inwards to be able to use tablets and technology. It's really relevant. Our children are coding. Our children are really learning about technology. You're absolutely right. Is it ready now? No. And I think we need to really give the books and the text that is required for the children to read now. And I think it's relevant. We need to focus on that. Having said that, I think we need to combine. I think we need to really incentivize parents. If you really give them the right kind of information on their phone, I think they'll get excited. And we have tried that in Kenya a little bit. When we during COVID, I sat with TAI, which is the Institute of Curriculum here in Tanzania, and I said, look, let's develop a little bit of learning so we can send it on WhatsApp, or we can send it on technology. Lots of parents were accessing it. We work with an organization called Shule Direct to develop the content that we need, keep them in a short YouTube program, and we send them, and parents were really interested. But we need to make it interesting and relevant to their lives. If we're telling them about Vasco da Gama, they will lose interest. But if you tell them about the technology that is required in Mbeya to grow mango in a different way, they will pay attention. If the children are learning about growing tomatoes in their garden, I think they will be interested. It's about making those linkage. But I think technology is really critical, and we're not buying or importing. We need to make technology for consumption here, and I think that is where we need to have the discussion. It's twofold of discussion. One is we need to help children to create technology, to use technology, and I think I'm optimistic. We need to use both aspects.
Well, we love optimism, so we want that for sure. So thank you. I'm not sure I'm doing my job here because we've got lots of great questions coming in from the audience. Let me dive into a couple of these in the time we've got left. Here's a pretty straightforward. I'll ask it to you, Sybil. Does learning poverty affect boys and girls equally? What's your experience in Sierra Leone?
I think the research has shown that girls are learning, shall I say, much slower, or the access to learning is much slower for girls than for boys, for a number of the socio-cultural reasons, and that we know. Obviously, first of all, the access to school. While we have now achieved gender parity, boys and girls are going to school at the same rate, but we're finding out that as they move to upper primary school, the girls begin to drop out, where things like, the domestic chores come in, early marriages, teenage pregnancies, and a whole lot of these other issues begin to come in. And that begins to disrupt the learning space of the girl. So I think generally that is what the research has shown. I want to talk quickly in terms of what Daniel also talked about just now on the technology thing as well. Girls, in terms of access to technology, as Marcela has also said, it's very limited. We don't have access. But I also think that in terms of putting books into girls' hands and boys and girls' hands, should go alongside the approach via technology. I think both of them should go hand in hand. Those areas where we can use technology, we should, and those areas where we need to have the hard copy books in children's hands, we should. So I think in terms of a response, that will be my answer.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's one about overall financing. And Marcela, it seems to be directed to you. They must figure the World Bank is the one that knows about this. And I think to interpret the question, learning poverty and the use of that terminology, as you said, was to raise the alarm bell. Are you seeing greater commitments from international donors but from national governments in terms of upping their game and increasing financing that's needed?
Unfortunately, no. I think after COVID, what we saw was that expenditures for health and other sectors increased, while expenditures for education in low and middle income countries decreased. With the war in Ukraine, many of the resources from donor governments have been redirected to the war. So unfortunately, we're not seeing a pattern that is very aligned to what we would expect. I want to make a caveat here because I think many people I think from the outside, one doesn't really realize how important and how vital really the domestic resource mobilization part is. I think when you look at the overall expenditure on education, even in low and middle income countries where donors have a bigger share, let's say, domestic resource mobilization is over 80-90%. So like honestly, what outside donors do is a drop in the bucket. So unless the domestic resource mobilization part is not solved, the rest will not follow. What donors really have, which is magnificent, is that they can enable innovations, they can enable movements, they can enable things in the local context, because most governments have most of their expenditures focused on teacher salaries. To be very transparent, over 80% of expenditures are on recurrent costs. So they don't have a leeway to do some of these things that might not cost a lot, but that are game changers. I think we still have a lot to do. The General Assembly on September had a forum on transforming education, the Transforming Education Summit, precisely because the numbers we were seeing were not really aligned with what was needed to solve the learning crisis. I hope little by little governments and donors start mobilizing, but sadly not yet.
So still lots of room for improvement on that, from what I'm hearing. Another specific question. We know that so many children are disadvantaged and marginalized, and so are left out, so to speak, but probably none more than those children with special needs. Daniel, what are you seeing in Tanzania in terms of efforts, for example, to better qualified teachers to be able to teach children with special needs? Is that a priority?
It certainly is. It's a priority, but you know, with the need compounded with complex issues that are affecting children, it may not get the attention it deserves. But currently, actually, the government has really adopted inclusive education policy. It was actually signed last year. We're currently supporting the government to develop an implementation plan on how we include inclusivity into the curriculum reform, into the policy reform, and also in getting the teachers that we need to do and support children with special needs. And I think this is really again. With the level of resources we have, with the level of teachers we have, with the level of the spaces we have, it is something that governments really need to pay very close attention to, because if we are to adapt and accept SDGs as the real guiding principles, we need to really work hard on this. So of course, like it has been said in a number of other discussions, what is missing is also the materials. If you have visual impairment, you require certain technology and innovation for you to access learning. If you are hearing impaired, you require certain support and sign language and also, so these are very expensive, they're time consuming, and government requires support to address them. So in principle, yes. In practice, it will require time and more resources to adapt.
Yeah, and I'm sure our colleagues would agree with you. Sybil, here's a question for you. Your mention of Cascade in terms of teacher development and the Cascade model and targets has intrigued the question, and asking you to elaborate more about how Cascade targets work in the field, in the programs that you work with.
how we've decided to approach this, we've decided to invest in training who we call master trainers. These are teachers or who've been in the profession for long, and we've spent time working with them over the years to train them in the new approaches, methodology and pedagogy. And they have in turn trained, for example, I'm just giving an example from the last training that we did, 100 facilitators who are again teachers and lecturers from across the board who have rolled out training. For example, the last one we did was in Port Loko district in Sierra Leone, for about 3,000 teachers who will then go into the classroom with these new teaching methodologies and roll them out and teach using them. Added to that, what we've added on to that is what we've called teaching and learning circles. These are spaces where teachers meet together to, as like a peer exchange and learning space where teachers will come together and see how, how well they're learning and how well they're applying these new techniques and methodologies and where they're getting stuck. And we have also coaches and conveners who will meet with them and help them to troubleshoot those difficult areas in terms of the learning. So we've done that in Port Loko recently. Last year, we rolled out the same training in Kenema, Moyamba and Pujao. Added to that, we've also supplied these teachers with a complete set of our books that we use. We were talking about the books and materials. I think parts of what we have done, which is one of the reasons I always say why I came to Code, was the fact that the books that we developed for teaching and for the children were context specific and they were relevant to my understanding. I've read almost all those books again as an adult, and they actually make sense reading it from a child's eye. I understand things a lot better now. So the teachers have those resources as well that they can refer to, that they can use as part of their tools and resources for training.
Thank you. Thank you. We're coming very close to the end here. There's one interesting question. We talked a bit at the beginning about research and the need for more research. Here's a very specific question. Does anyone know of research that's taking place on the correlation between quality of education, relevant education, and young people who join extremist organizations? Do we feel that there is a direct correlation? Anyone want to jump on that?
I didn't get the question.
Well, is there in fact, or has there been any research done on the correlation between access to quality education versus young people who end up joining extremist organizations?
I think I'm sure there are research, but I think overall as educators we can tell you if you're a ward and if you're an adolescent in your end of your primary or secondary, and if you find a bunch of young people who are doing more interesting than being sitting down and doing some maths that you are not going to pass, it's easier to be attracted to this other group of people who are much more similar to and have much more interesting interests than the boring teacher that you know you're not going to make it. So there is a direct relationship, and you know it's easier to talk about the extremists because they're dangerous and we need to talk about them. But we can take it the gangs in Ottawa, the crimes in Toronto. It could be in Detroit. It could be in London. There is a correlation between people who really are desperate, coming from certain economic background, both good and bad economic background, when they feel schools are not offering them what they want and what they need, it's a lot easier for them to be attracted to other places. But I'm not aware of specific looking at this. I can look into our work, but I think this is something that we can easily respond to. Yes, I think there is a correlation between children being at school and not learning and not really acquiring what they need, and doing this extracurricular activity, which would give them a little bit of more a safety net and gives them a little bit more purpose for them.
I like your response, Daniel, because I think it also goes back to the very first point that this is truly universal. This is truly global in nature. That if we're not offering opportunity, if a child is not seeing advantage and potential for being in school and staying in school, then they're going to look elsewhere for that hope in life, whatever that might be. So I think on that notion, I want to wrap it up. I found it incredibly interesting and incredibly to the point, all of your responses and the discussion. And I think what we're all saying is really that education, quality education, relevant education, it is a gateway, and that literacy itself, basic numeracy are really gateway skills, and that we know that this, in many ways, the sad fact is that as ambitious as the SDG 4 is, and as welcoming we are of that ambition, 2030 is only 7 short years away, and it's just not very realistic to think that we're going to make all these goals. So I fully support this notion of focus, because there is time to make that difference, the difference that children need. And we really want to start to ensure that they're getting those basic skills of reading proficiency and the ability to do mathematics, and that will in fact open doors and will in fact open opportunity and will bring reality to the idea of lifelong learning, which we all support. So on that note, I really want to thank you sincerely for taking the time, for joining in this conversation. Daniel, thank you very much for joining in late in the evening, coming out of Dar es Salaam. Sybil, thank you very, very much for joining from Freetown. And Marcela, thank you very, very much from Washington. I hope we can keep the conversation going, and look forward to meeting and re-meeting all of you in person, so that it's certainly a conversation that has to continue, and that we've got to continue to amplify the message and bring more supporters and allies aboard. So on that note, we're right at time, and really a sincere thank you to everyone, and thanks to all of our audience for joining. I know that I barely touched upon the questions that are in front of us, but we will be sharing this event on our website, and it has been recorded, and we're continuing to look at the questions, and we'll try to answer any in writing of a specific nature. So until the next time, thank you very, very much.